we are a minute past, so why don't we begin? Father Dave, do you want to lead us in opening prayer and kick things off on today's topic?
Okay, will do. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jess, and good morning and welcome everyone to, according to my records, the 29th session of stewardship training with our partners from CCS. It's hard to believe that we've had that many sessions, but it is true. For our invocation this morning, I'd like to use a prayer from the prayer book. It's a prayer for the right use of God's gifts. So let us pray. Almighty God, whose loving hand has given us all that we possess, grant us grace that we may honor you with our substance, and, remembering the account which we must one day give, may be faithful stewards of your bounty. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So today, our topic of discussion is going to be the case statement. And a case statement is simply an explanation or a reason why people should support the campaign or the annual giving campaign or whatever it is that we are raising money for. And as I talked with Jess earlier this week about the case statement, I think a case statement for a church or a faith-based organization is going to be slightly different than the case statement for, say, a totally secular organization like the SPCA or your college or university or hospital. And the reason that I say that is because an important part of the reason that we're asking people to give is not so much to support the work of the church, although that's an important part of it, but it's for the faith formation and growth of the donors, as well as to raise funds for the organization. And it reminds me of one of the foundational principles of transformational stewardship, which our Stewardship Commission has been teaching for many, many years, is that stewardship is not primarily about fundraising. Now, obviously, it has a dimension of it that's about raising the money that the church needs to pay the bills and keep the lights on and keep the ministry moving forward. But stewardship is primarily about faith formation. It's about our growth, the growth of God's people in their relationship with God and with Christ's body, the church. So an important part of a case statement for a church or a faith-based organization is the reason that we are asking you to give is to encourage and invite you into a deeper, more intimate relationship with Christ and with his body, the church. So an illustration that I often use when I'm talking about this particular foundational principle of transformational stewardship is, I'm currently serving as the interim rector at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Pittman. So assume that in the mail this afternoon, when I look through the mail as it arrives on my desk, I open an envelope and there's a check for $10 million in there. Would that would happen, but just for the sake of this illustration. And the check is from an anonymous donor, and it's an undesignated gift. In other words, the church can use it for whatever purpose they desire. So I would say that if that happened, the Church of the Good Shepherd would not have to do any more fundraising. We wouldn't have to have any more hoagie sales or anything like that. We could live and thrive, really, off the proceeds of that gift. If it was invested, we wouldn't have to do any kind of fundraising in the church. But I would argue that we would still have to do stewardship, because stewardship is not primarily about fundraising, but it's about our formation, our faith formation, our growth as disciples of Jesus Christ. And in that sense, stewardship is really at the very heart of the church's mission, which is to make disciples of all nations, including our own members, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Jesus' final words to his apostles before he ascended into heaven. And of course, tomorrow we remember that because tomorrow is Ascension Day. But so what I'm suggesting is that as we think about preparing our case statements, the reason why donors should give to whatever the fundraising activity is, whether it's an annual giving campaign or planned giving campaign or whatever, or a capital campaign, an important part of our case statement should be language which suggests that the reason we give is so that we can grow in our relationship with God and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So and as we continue to talk about the development of a case statement, just keep that in mind. And I think we're going to be doing a little exercise in actually preparing a case statement to make sure that we include language, not just what the church needs, but why donors should give for their own spiritual growth and for their formation as disciples of Jesus Christ. So that's what I would like to share, Jess. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Father Dave. That's really helpful framing as we dive into this. And of course, feel free to chime in as much as you want while we go through this. So as Father Dave said, today we are talking about the case for support and what we actually mean when we talk about it, right? We're going to do that breakout exercise in small groups, or maybe one group. We'll see how we're feeling. It's a smaller group today. And then we'll go through what some of those key elements of a case for support are, what they look like, and that'll be that. So let's jump into it. All right. So if you joined us at our last session, we talked about messaging and storytelling, right? We really spent a lot of time talking about our own personal why stories. Why do I support the church? But we're still talking about messaging in this session, right? And that's because, if you think about it, it used to be that people pledged and gave to the church simply because they always had, right? And because their parents did it before them. It's sort of what we did. But today, people who are making decisions about their giving have access to stories from a number of different places, right? Including other effective nonprofits that are also sharing effective and impactful stories about why their mission is also essential. So we think you need to be able to do the same as you raise money year round or in a very targeted campaign. So what is a case for support? And Father Dave said it already, but a case for support or a case statement, I'm going to use these terms pretty interchangeably, is the statement of your cause explaining what your nonprofit does, why it's important, and why people should support you. So put simply, right, it's the answer to the question, why are we raising money? It's a description of what the church is doing to change the world or your community. It works to translate budget and need into something that's visionary, right? And that people can understand and relate to. And with the church, as Father Dave said, it's not just what is the church doing. There's that added dimension that's so important here about spiritual growth and spiritual transformation. We often talk about a case for support in the context of a campaign, and certainly all campaigns should have a case for support, but we think annual stewardship campaigns fall into that. They should have a case for support, or at the very, very least, a brochure. So we want you to start thinking about your case for support and annual stewardship campaigns and regular campaigns in that same way, right? They're visionary communications of why you're raising money and what the money will be used for. Next slide, please. So we talked about this last time. I think this is a familiar slide, but case messaging can come in many forms, right? It can be verbal through conversations or at special events, or it can be formal collateral, like an actual case for support document, a case statement. And it's that case statement document that we're going to really focus on today, because I would argue that having it down on paper is going to help set you up for success and ensure that your case messaging is consistent, conveys that sense of urgency and a need for investment, right? And that case statement document is really that central document explaining the what, why, when, how, that all your other messaging about the campaign stems from, right? It's an old fundraising saying that people don't give to need, they give to vision. And I think that's also true about the church, right? People don't stretch their giving simply because you need a new furnace, right? They give more because they're able to see a vision of people being reached and God's purposes being accomplished in the life of their church and ministry. So we want you to keep that in mind. All right, so next slide, please. Again, this case statement document, we want you to always think about it in a way that's positive, right? It should be positive, it should be credible, it should be realistic, compelling, inspiring. It's not just a brochure for the initiative, right? It is not the strategic plan or an existing mission statement or business as usual, right? It's new, it's exciting, it's important, it's changeable, right? We always talk about a case for support as a living, breathing document, meaning that you should be able to update it as you go. You should be able to personalize it for different conversations. And we'll get to that in a minute. It's not full of irrational claims, right? It needs to be logical, it needs to be achievable. Importantly, it's not a substitute for personalized gift requests, right? And I wanna really emphasize that, right? When you create a case statement, you're not just done, right? It's not something that you send ahead with an ask, right? This is a document that you can use in a conversation, right? To help guide the conversation. And then maybe you leave it behind with the member or parishioner. But this is a useful tool for you to flip through, to have, not just to replace your conversation. And I think that's important. The next slide, please. Thanks. And a case statement has many uses, right? It's not just for fundraising during a solicitation meeting, but we actually think it can be really useful in those pre-ask meetings that we talked about, where you're starting to share your vision, you're starting to ask questions and gauge their interest in what you're proposing, right? This is an opportunity to walk through the case statement with someone and really start listening to or watching to see where their ears perk up. What are they asking questions about? It's a really helpful tool to start understanding what your members are actually interested in. It can also be used to recruit volunteers and leaders who are going to help you with the initiative and get their early buy-in during training to get other members on board. Again, think about the case for support as a core document that you can update and personalize depending on the need and the use. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about what actually goes into a case for support and how do you start writing and structuring one. Okay, a strong case statement starts with why. And maybe you're sensing a theme here, right? But we really like asking you to think about why. And a strong case statement starts with why, right? It should answer it, why me, why now, why this? And ultimately, this case for support should be donor-centric, meaning that it speaks to the donor directly and answers why it's important to them, right? It's our church, it's our diocese. It's as much about the donor as it is about the recipient, right? What does it mean in terms of growing their relationship with God, right? It's also creating a sense of urgency. Why is this important right now? And what happens if we don't raise the funds now, right? And lastly, it should be compelling, right? Why is it that we need a new furnace? Well, it's more than just a laundry list of needs, a new furnace, a new roof, new stained glass windows. But what's the actual impact of that need? What is the root of that need, right? The furnace is going to allow a lot more than just heat, right? It's going to provide a safe and comfortable home for our community to worship in together. And further, how does that actually further each of our own spiritual transformation? So let's start thinking about that why. We're going to get more into the tactical side of building out a case for support in a bit and really dive into what are the key sections of a case for support. But I think at the very least, we should all have the answer to these two basic questions before you start writing one, right? Why the church? Why the Episcopal Church? What is the case for the church at large? Why should people care? It's not just bricks and mortar, but also that spiritual component. And why our church, right? What makes our church so special? What is unique about our community and our congregation? So for the next 10 minutes or so, let's take some time and really think about this. Let's have a conversation. How many people are we? I'm trying to see if it makes sense to break out into small groups or not. Okay, I don't think we need to break out into small groups. I think we should just have this conversation here. But let's start talking about it. I'm going to take a step back and let you all really think and start answering those questions. Why the church? Why our church? And Father Dave, maybe you can help me out here, facilitating.
Yeah, what I think might be helpful, and I don't know if you're prepared to do this, but for us to see and hear a case statement from another organization, just to get an idea of how it flows, how long it is, if you have access to what you think is a really successful, succinct, great illustration of a powerful, compelling case statement, I think it would be helpful for us if we could hear that.
So a case statement is generally a document that's 3 to 5 pages long.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it has a number of different components to it, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes in terms of what are the sections that you would use. But I think even before that, before you start actually drafting a complete document, it's really getting to that root internally of why, because that's going to make all the other sections just flow much easier. When you do need to start outlining what is your plan, what is the opportunity, what is the need, what is the opportunity, what is the plan. So we can certainly share examples with you. But I think before we do that, it would be great to just talk about that why, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start. For me, this is a very timely and very relevant conversation because the Church of the Good Shepherd, where I'm serving, we're going to be launching a small capital campaign, probably after Labor Day this fall, to raise funds for the complete restoration of our stained glass windows. And we have beautiful windows, but they've been in the church for over 100 years, and they really need to be restored. So, we're going to be working. I'm working with the Stewardship Committee right now about developing a case statement. And the thought that I had as a way of kind of emphasizing that spiritual transformational dimension of the statement is that, people 100 years ago gave sacrificially so that we could have these beautiful windows which enhance our worship. But now the windows need to be restored. So it's our turn now. These folks gave sacrificially 100 years ago so that we could enjoy the benefits of the beauty and the aesthetic appeal of these windows. Now it's our turn to provide for the next generation, to make sure that they have the same spiritual benefits that we've enjoyed for all these years. So an important part of our case for support, for encouraging people, inviting people to give to this stained glass window restoration project, is that it's our turn to step up to the plate and do what our spiritual ancestors did 100 years ago. People we don't even know, they didn't know us. They gave so that we could enjoy this the benefit of their generosity, and now it's our turn to do the same.
Something, excuse me, with something like stained glass windows, which you can see and enjoy and be spiritual with, it's a really good thing. Now, when your breaker box melts down because you had a power failure last week, that is really hard to relay spiritually unless we want to start service in the dark, not run the AC, and give everybody a good feel of what it would be like if we had no electricity coming into the building.
It is a wildly different example, isn't it?
And it is something, we had a power failure last week. So it was brought to our attention that these breaker boxes are not what you want in your home or your church.
So this is no abstract example
we
for
have
you.
To be spiritual about, maybe the energy that comes through the church into the AC unit and keeps you cool. But probably us not being in here and Zooming has saved this box, because the box is starting to melt. So it's an urgent thing, but it's hard to convey. I mean, windows, you can see the windows and enjoy and very spiritual. Breaker box, not so much.
Yeah. Except that, we're coming up on the Feast of Pentecost, not this week, but next week. You could talk about the energy that the church before Pentecost was, they didn't have the energy of the Spirit, something like that. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. It's a much different reality when you're talking about something like, electricity and breaker boxes and air conditioning and all of that.
Yeah. And it's a safety situation too.
Yeah. That is a challenge. But again, I would say, emphasizing we have this need, but we all, as individuals, we have a need to give so that we can grow in our relationship with God, so that our own spiritual life can be transformed through our giving to this apparently mundane, secular kind of need that the church has. So that might be a way of interjecting some of that language of transformation into an ask for a relatively, ordinary, mundane need that the church has at this particular time.
And sometimes it can be helpful to group things together, right? If you're raising funds for a few different things, which includes fixes to mundane things like this, it's all supporting the core mission and vision that you have for your church, which will be a thriving community, a thriving place for you to worship in. And people always get hung up, or I find that people get hung up on how to talk about things like this, because it's a much easier ask to say, support our food program than it is to support something like that. It's a sexier program, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, it's your community, right? And you're talking about things that are going to help you be comfortable together. It's a meeting place, and it needs to function. So I think it's okay. We shouldn't shy away from asking for core funding costs, core operational costs, when you have this vision of your church, right? And what that church looks like and how that church operates. Because it all comes down to the why, right? What would happen if your church goes away, right? You can think about it from the other side. And once you have answers to those questions, it'll be a lot easier to frame things. That's not just the nitty gritty, right?
And I don't know if you're on the vestry or the stewardship team or one of the wardens in your church, but listening to you're all those. You have several of those hats.
I'm the parish administrator, and I'm on the vestry stewardship. I'm the clerk of the vestry as well.
Okay. Well, but as I listen to you, you're already beginning to tell this story in a way that invites people to enter it. I know this is not as glamorous as something more visible, more readily understandable, like stained glass windows, but there are these core things about it that speak to our relationship with God and one another, and the things that are entrusted to us. They're a reflection of who we are and how we live out our life as the church. In fact, whether it's visible and glamorous or not, those core things are there. In some way, the beauty of a window is a distraction, or or a sort of a head turner away from those things, as much as they're a symbol of those things. And something as painfully mundane as circuit breaker boxes that have gone bad, and more of which could go bad, point to those same core values. And as I listen to you, you have an intuitive sense from faith of how to tell this story and how to share this story in a way that invites people into it, that speaks to these questions of why. That was what I heard when you spoke.
Well, it did shower sparks on me on my birthday.
Well, that's good. Now that it has your full attention, you can
It was a
share the
sign.
best what you've learned.
And I've been around here a long time, since I was 6 years old. So if I sound passionate, that's why. You know, came here as a little kid and watched us grow. And I try to remind people, we're on 5 acres here. What would it cost to keep your house if you were on 5 acres?
Oh, yeah.
And so you touched on something there, right? You've been a part of this community since you were 6 years old. So you have experience and stories to share. And in these case support documents, sharing those stories, those testimonials, those quotes from members of the community can be a really powerful way to get your message across, right? It's people, you're sharing it with people you know. So why not share stories of people that they know and they can relate to and feel that sense of community? Any other thoughts? Otherwise, we can continue talking, or we can move on and get into some of the key components and possibly even share.
I just wanted to mention, Jessica,
Yeah.
For me, I mean, of course, I've been a homeowner for a long time, but to me, it translates the same issues to our church with multiple buildings and, you know, everything's involved. When we work toward, you know, having an emergency fund, or we know our roof is going to be replaced in 5 years, and you're fortunate enough to be able to save for those expenses. And we all know that things can happen suddenly and have to be replaced immediately. When that money's there, it doesn't rob that energy from you. You know the money's there. Yes, you have to, you know, set up the work to get this done or repaired or replaced. But when the money's not there, or it's more than you budgeted, it robs your energy from, you know, what you need to do as leadership for your church and your congregation. It just kind of becomes a priority, and it's awful. So it gives you peace of mind when you've made provisions and put the work in to make sure that you did your best to have that money there and prepare for what's ahead. So to me, that's really important. It gives us peace of mind. So.
And part of how need is to identify that need and the opportunity that's in it, to have that freedom, do what we need to do now, and it frees us and it returns energy to us, and it helps us pass on to others. But inviting people to share in that freedom and the energy and the work and the excitement of meeting those challenges. I've seen you share that.
Yes, thank you.
So let's keep going so that we can really dive into the format and what pieces are actually go into and form a case for support document. And then we can share what one looks like. Evelyn has one ready to share if that would be helpful. And again, you know, feel free to chime in. So this is an overview slide that we think is helpful in terms of mapping out the key elements, and we will go into each of these in more detail in a minute. But when we talk about the case for support, that outlines why, right? The good thing about a case statement is there are those standard pieces of the document that nearly every case for support should have. So there's already a good structure in place. And it's sort of like a story, right? With an arc and a conflict and a resolution. So first you want to set the stage or context, right? In order to establish credibility, share your value proposition that answers, you know, why should I invest in the church? Then you want to share that need in a way that's going to resonate with the audience, right? What is the challenge that your congregation can help solve? Why is this urgent What would happen if the church ceased to exist, right? You can work backwards with some of those questions. Then you want to share the opportunity, right? You've identified the need. So how is your congregation best placed to solve this problem or need? What will your church do? What is the impact it can have, and why is this the right solution, right? Next is laying out the plan and clarifying how your goal will be accomplished, right? How much needs to be raised? How are you going to raise it? Over what timeline? You want to show that you have a plan in place and that you've actually taken the time to think it through. And finally, it always has a call to action, right? That inspires people to want to join in and answers the question, how can I participate? So let's talk about each of these a bit further. All right, so context setting, right? Again, your case for support should really make the compelling argument of why your congregation is best solved for a specific need or problem, right? And you want this to be credible. So again, sharing some of those high-level stats or testimonials, right, as we just talked about, is going to help bring this to life. Leadership is always an important thing to share. Who's involved, the rector, the vestry. Sometimes it's helpful to talk about early lead donors if it's appropriate, and how have they, as a community, as a team, have demonstrated sound judgment or a compelling vision, right? What's your church's experience in implementing some of these programs? What's the unique value proposition? And what's the value for money, right? How are you going to maximize the investment that's made by your members? Okay. We talk about the need, right? What is the urgent need for right now, right? What are you asking for? What is unique about this particular ask? Again, it's why me, why now, why this? It's donor-centric, it's urgent, it's compelling, right? Tell a story of this need, right? Clarify, why is this urgent? And can you imply what might happen if you're not able to address such a need, right? And you've already started to do this, right? And through our conversation. And the question is, can you now put pen to paper and really start drafting this out? Next is the opportunity, right? What will the church do with more funding? And what's the impact it will have, right? Why is this the right solution? And I realize I'm just peppering you with a lot of questions, right? But I think that's actually part of building the case, right? It's asking yourself these questions and getting ahead of them through your case statement, because these are the questions that your congregation, your potential donors have, right? And so you want to get ahead of this and answer them through this document. It's your chance to connect the work with the desired outcomes, right? It's an opportunity to talk about the importance of the church and the impact it will have on the community, spiritually, physically, emotionally. This is your chance to be really inspirational and donor-centric, using phrases like, this is what you can help us accomplish, right? This is your community. You're talking to your community. It's about them as much as it is about you, right? Then the plan. And I think this is a really important piece of it, and people often forget that this is an important piece to live inside that case statement document. People are only going to want to support something that they feel when they feel secure in their investment, right? When they know that there has been a plan that has been thought about, that the expectations are realistic, right? So certainly in a campaign setting, for example, you'll want to establish a goal, right? Something you're working towards that shows that they're a part of a larger effort, all driving towards a specific dollar amount, right? Sometimes it can be helpful to share who else is giving and the progress made towards that goal. If you think about it, everyone wants to join a winning cause. And certainly newer donors are going to want to know that their sacrificial investment is not the only one, right? And that sort of goes back to how we talk about setting a campaign goal and when we share the goal with the larger community, right? We generally say that you don't want to go public with your fundraising goal until about 75% of the funds have already been raised. Because if you're going to go out in front of your whole community and say, we're starting a campaign, we have a goal of $100,000 and we've raised nothing so far, but we want you all to join. That's hard. That's hard to come around as an individual and say, sure, my donation is going to make a big difference. when no one else is giving, right? But when you're able to say our goal is $100,000 and we've already raised $75,000 and we want all of you to help us raise that last bit, right? That's exciting. People can get okay, this is happening. Like people are on board with this. We're going to be able to accomplish this. My donation will make a difference. So sometimes it's helpful to balance that throughout your case for support. Again, there's always that balance to strike about what the funds are for, right? Whether it's hyper specific or more general. We know that general operating funds or core funds, like we just talked about, are so important and sometimes harder. So it's okay to ask for both, right? It's okay to talk about the feeding program and the core costs that you need, right? As long as you're messaging it in an impactful way and tying it back to that why, right? Why is this important? And finally, the plan will often include a financial breakdown of how the funds are raised and a roadmap of how you're going to accomplish it, right? And this roadmap can come in a number of different forms, but sometimes and often it's in the form of that table of gifts that we've talked about before, right? So you can show that you've thought through how many gifts are needed at each level to achieve the goal. And that can often bring things back down to reality and show that you really thought through the needs and how within your own congregation you think that you can actually achieve it. All right. And last but not least, the call to action, right? It's the ask to the donor to participate. And this is so important because if we think back to that slide I often show during these sessions, it's called the basics, right? It's people give to people. People give because they're asked. People give to leadership that they know and that they trust, right? It all comes back to this, right? So this is your opportunity in the case to say, join us, right? It's your chance to invite them to participate, not only through a donation, but sometimes through their time and their connections as well, right? And that's why we talked about earlier that the case statement can be, you can personalize a case statement. Because sometimes you're asking someone to do more than just give a monetary donation. You're asking for their time. You're asking them to join a committee, right? You're asking them to play a larger part in it as well. So that's why we think you should always reserve the editing rights so you can personalize it for each person that you're speaking with. It's also an opportunity to share recognition opportunities or opportunities to be recognized. And I've said it before, I really think that everyone should be offered an opportunity to be recognized. They may not want it, and that is okay. Most people probably won't, but it's the right gesture. And lastly, you want to make this easy for people to say yes. So you want to share ways that people can give that is flexible of people's personal circumstances, right? Whether it's multi-year gifts, allowing people to fulfill their pledges in monthly or annual installments, or sometimes even delayed payments, right? Sometimes someone can say, yes, I can give, but I can't really fulfill my pledge for another 6 months, and that's okay. So any questions before we move on about some of those core components? Evelyn, do you want to pull up a sample case statement so people can start to get a sense of the look and feel of some of these documents? Sure.
So this is the campaign Case for Support for Trinity in Morristown, New Jersey. It's a campaign they're currently in right now. So we started by talking a little bit about Trinity, its history, and how it serves the community. We included a quote from the campaign co-chair. So it kind of grounds the case statement and what they're doing and why they're important to the community and why Trinity.
The context setting.
Then we started looking into the future, into the vision, into why they're doing this campaign, what we're hoping that raising these funds will, where it will take the church.
The need.
Yep. And then these are the actual capital improvements that they were hoping to make with the funds, the repairs, the installations, the renovations, and then also at the very bottom, programmatic as well.
The opportunity.
And then lastly, this is the call to action. This is asking people to join them. This is the philanthropic piece of it. It's not too long. It's only 4 or 5 pages. So
now what sticks out to me is how visual it is, right? And I think that's really important, right? There are lots of photos, there are bold headings, it's easy to read, it's not too lengthy. And so something to keep in mind, and we can talk about that a little bit more on our last few slides. So on the slide that Evelyn's about to pick up, share, we're going to talk about tips for writing a case statement. And Evelyn just went through this process with Trinity, so she can probably talk a little bit more about it. But there are a few things you want to keep in mind. And I think most importantly is that when you do write one, it's really important to collaborate and not work in a vacuum, right? You're going to want to get input from a number of people, the vestry, the rector, 1 or 2 members of your church, right? This is not something you need to do alone, right? Rely on other community members, get opinions and different voices in this. And when you do start sharing it to get iterations, to get feedback, I would just say it's helpful to show a version in full color, right? It's formatted nicely so people can really start to see this come to life. We talked about this last night in the session, how sometimes it can be helpful to get feedback, not just from that insular leadership community, but maybe 1 or 2 members of your congregation. Really see, is this resonating? Does this make sense? Is this something they can get behind, right? It's that old fundraising adage, if you ask someone for money, they're going to give you advice, but if you ask for their advice, they're going to give you money. And that's what can be so helpful with a case statement. You can start sharing some early versions and just starting to sort of test the water, dip your toes in, see if this is resonating. And in time, maybe their testimonials will make it into the case statement, right? If you do have an expert writer on your team or in your congregation, don't be afraid to ask for their help. They can sometimes be really great resources for you. And remember, leave pride of authorship at the door. Again, that collaboration is just so important as you're communicating the vision of your congregation, right? It's not just one person's vision. A few format considerations, just very quickly, when you do think about how you're going to format it, and we saw this with the Trinity case, there's bold headings, there's catchy titles, not just for the actual initiative itself, but also for your subsections, right? They can be innovative, but even if you just go back to the basics, right? You can use titles like the need, the opportunity, like make it very easy for people to understand and read. People have short attention spans these days. They don't like to read long things. So like as much as you can make this easy for people to digest by using short paragraphs, bullets, visuals, photos, that can be much more effective than long verbose sentences. Make it legible. This seems really basic, but try to avoid making using font size smaller than 12. We don't need a magnifying glass to read a case for support. And I think often people fall into this trap where they're trying to fit everything on one page, so they resort to smaller text. Try to avoid that. Go on to a second or third page and add another photo if you can. And again, I can't stress the importance of quotes and stories, testimonials. You know, it's your community. Having endorsements from those within the community can be very powerful and very touching. All right, and last but not least, a few final suggestions. Just to use some of the things we've talked about, right? Keep it short. 3 to 5 pages should suffice, depending on the format. You want it to be factual and positive. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but actually positive, uplifting stories do go a lot further than sob stories. You know, it used to be, you know, if you remember some of those old commercials, it used to be that the flies on the children's faces in Africa was what people resorted to, right? The distended tummies. But actually, through studies, they found that it's those more uplifting photos of the children actually receiving a hot meal and sleeping in a safe shelter that goes a lot further. So I think it's just try and stay positive throughout your case for supports. Like, make people feel uplifted and energized by the opportunity that exists, right? Use motivating but not flowery text. Again, incorporate photos, visuals, stories. Make it visual, but also easy to visualize, right? Paint that picture of what the outcome will be. Identify contributing leaders, ask them to share their stories. Drive the process to complete the document in a timely fashion, right? Don't spend too much time on this, right? You can spend months and months going back and forth, but you should be able to complete it within a week or two if you spend time with the right people putting pen to paper. Make sure you're involving leaders and donors. Again, it goes back to the asking for advice and you'll get money. It's a great opportunity to involve these leaders and donors in the crafting of this vision, right? To really get their buy-in. Make sure you're engaging your vestry and your clergy to ensure that the case for support is adapted as their own, right? We need their buy-in. It's the rector and the senior leaders that are often going to be out there talking and using this case for support and asking for money. So we need to make sure that their vision is reflected in it as well. Use it for major gifts. That's the core purpose of this document. And last but not least, remember your own why, right? That spiritual piece that grounds all of this, and which is why we just keep coming back to it. All right. So that's everything for me. Any questions, concerns? Do you currently have a case statement? Do you see yourself building one?
Guess we'll have to. No, we have not in the past, so this is helpful.
This is the first time that St. Mary's has ever done anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to sort of push it to be in conjunction with our homecoming in October. I think that would be an opportune time to bring something like this up, especially since we have so many people who come in from home for homecoming. And we can reach, I think, many more folks as they're coming in for that big celebration. We can keep it low key. I love that that brochure. I think that's beautiful. We have a community garden, so we can put pictures of the garden all over the place. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this works with us, and also I'm looking forward to seeing how this is going to work with everybody else. See what your take is and how all of you go about it.
And Sharon, if we can be of help during the process, don't hesitate to reach out.
Oh, trust me, I won't.
Okay, good.
Sharon, can you picture yourself in a conversation with other parish members or other parish leaders, your clergy, about incorporating this idea into the homecoming activity and beginning about how to tell the story and maybe some documents or a community conversation leading up towards that?
Yeah, we've kind of touched on that. I brought it up at our vestry meeting about 2 months ago after this was brought up. And it was funny because on Zoom, everybody's going, huh? because they just never thought about it.
Yeah.
So, I want to pick as many brains as humanly possible. St. Mary's is about 100 years old, and it's actually historically Black church. So they've been in Pleasantville all that time, and they've been in the community doing community service for a long time, and then they lost their priest, and things just kind of went downhill. Now we're trying to bring it back up again. So and this is really great because we're going to be able to reach out to people who don't normally come to St. Mary's anymore for various reasons. And maybe not only will we be trying to raise some money for St. Mary's, but hopefully we'll maybe be able to bring some of these people back into the fold. So I think this is going to be maybe 2 or 3-fold for us.
If we can support you in igniting that spark, if we can be a sounding board to you or to you and a couple of people as you explore that between now and the fall, let me know what that looks like for you.
No, I will. Thank you.
Maybe we'll make that pitch that it's going to ignite a spark unless we replace that machine.
Yes, that's a touchy metaphor of where you are.
Good point. We just had to replace our boiler, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
We luckily years ago had a gentleman that we didn't even know. He included us in his will, and when we got the money the day after, the boiler broke.
Oh no.
So we put a plaque down by the boiler that he,
yeah.
it's in the basement, but it's there.
But who cares? It's there.
Thank you, Jack.
You bring up a good point. These case for supports, we're talking about them in the context of major gifts of the campaign, but these can be also very helpful in having conversations about planned gifts as well, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just don't want to lose sight of that.
I had lunch yesterday with the brother of a man and the executor of the will of a man who was a longtime parishioner here. His parents had been members. Their parents had been members here. I think the grandparents went here too. And he recently left there's a man named Bill. We had lunch with his brother Barry yesterday. Bill left a very generous gift to the church, $100,000 and change.
Nice.
He had been a Sunday school teacher here. He's remembered as very warm, very quiet, but very warm man, and never married, and remembered grace in his will. And he talked about the furnace. He talked about the circuit breaker boxes. The people who are here now, it's going to be our turn to replace the roofs on our several buildings, and this will be a big part of that. But sharing these stories of how much it meant to have the church remembered in Bill's will, and the story of the guy whose name you put next to the replaced furnace. It's unglamorous, but it's part of the fabric of life. It's part of this long story that's longer than us that we can share, and it can be very much part of an invitation to a conversation about planned giving, a conversation about our why, our case statement of how much it means to be on the receiving end of that, and how do we take our place in a long procession.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, if there are no other thoughts or concerns, I think we can probably leave it there. Bob or Dave, do one of you want to pray us out?
I'll be happy to. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord, thank you for this good day, for this time together, listening for your word, reflecting on how you are alive and present and at work in our lives, in our parishes, in our needs, and in our hopes. Help us always be aware of your presence as we respond to the needs of your church and the world around us in your name. Thank you for lifting us up and for the gifts that you give us to equip us for all the things you give us to walk in. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, Jess, Evelyn.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great
Enjoy.
day.
Thank
Beautiful
you.
day.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you.